Today's participants are Robin Roberts, and Key Francis. We join the conversation in the faculty lounge.
Once I got in the studio, it didn't matter where I was. I was inside my own studio, and the majority of my day was spent inside my studio, and it didn't matter whether that studio was in France or Tupelo, Mississippi. It was basically me confronting the work on a day-to-day basis, and so one place is good as another. And you know, once airports were accessible, well, I could go anywhere I needed to go for professional reasons. So just as good a place to work as any place else, I think.
So have you always known you wanted to be an artist? I mean, is that something that
that
you know, like as soon as you pick up a pencil, or how did
that
happen for you?
Some people do, and I think the people that find that out early on in life have an advantage. I mean, we certainly here have students that come in who've gone to high schools that are devoted entirely to the arts, for instance. And you know, I grew up in Tupelo, Mississippi, in a small town, so I grew up playing sports, and my family were engineers and wanted me to go into engineering. So I started off in aerospace engineering, but I like to draw planes.
Oh,
that was
Well, you know, I think about people who work with dimensions, I guess, who or people who work in music theory, perhaps, have a mathematical mind to put all that together. But usually think about, you know, someone who's an artist, I'm stereotyping here, but as being, you know, more, less analytical and more creative and intuitive. But it sounds like you can have use all those skills to bear on the work you do.
Well, I think I have, and I think it's interesting in the arts because generally people do fall into one of those two characteristics. They're, you know, left brain to right brain. And they are either primarily structuralist or more intuitively driven. The people that I think in the arts who are primarily intuitively driven, who don't really have that business or structural side to their mind, are generally people that succeed are generally people who find very good business managers, very good dealers, agents to do that for them, and they're lucky, I think. But I think your survival skills, if you have both sides, your survival skills are higher. The odds are that you'll probably stay in the arts because you can do most of that yourself. You know, I think if you're a working artist, a lot of people would be surprised at how much of your day is spent doing business. You know, how many hours you spend doing accounting, and mailing statements and invoices, and making project proposals and budget estimates for projects, and dealing with clients in a business. You know,
So you were thinking about engineering. And then you decided to be an artist. I guess it wasn't the invoicing part of it that got you into it.
No,
it was because you think about it as a romantic kind of. I looking at it from where I am as a romantic idea of living a life as an artist, you know, or people are drawn to that and have to live it. So you at some point you went from engineering to art, or were there things in between? Or?
There were things in between, but I had an uncle that was an artist that encouraged me in art all the way till he found out I was going to actually go into art for a livelihood, and then he tried his best he could to stop me from that. But because he had a pretty rough go of it as a life as an artist, I ended up in business himself, in a used equipment business to make a living. But I think it was a change. I've been lucky, I think, because I think all of the sort of more structural aspects of my development that involved thinking through projects and theorems in an analytical way have been a benefit in my life as an artist. And I probably had to develop more of the intuitive side. But I think, you know, I always did poetry, and I always wrote, and I always made paintings, and a friend of mine and I were the ones in high school that designed all of the scenery backdrops for the plays, and that's what you do, you know. that plus doing the posters for all the candidates for senior vice president or whatever, you know. But
I bet they wish they kept those now.
Yeah,
that you did for them.
Now they're very valuable. But the person who had been the other artist in my hometown that in the same class went on to become Artist of the Year in Seattle and is doing very well out there as a professional artist. And he went straight into art. And we met up 2 or 3 years later, and he was very happy in art. And I decided that probably I should do that. So it was, and even that I think was a long, slow movement that I made from deciding to go into graphic design and commercial art to, you know, being a sculptor, which I think is the hardest way to make a living in the arts, in the visual arts. Probably it's costs more to make a project, and they're more expensive to ship and build, and if you mess up, it's very expensive.
I would think so.
I had an architect one time. I was building a piece for a building. The architect sent it twice through a blueprint machine and reversed it twice or something. And he sent me the blueprint for the piece backwards, and I built it backwards. And everybody liked it, and we got it up on the side of the building. And the secretary came out and she said, "You know, that's exactly the reverse of the image."
Oh my God.
It had like $20,000 worth of bronze in it. So it was an expensive venture, but I didn't have to pay for it, luckily.
Good.
The client had to go again, and the architect, I think, bit the bullet on that one. But
So what sort of scale have you, like, in your sculptures? What sort of scale do you work with?
Well, now I generally work sort of a human scale, 4 to 5 feet, something like that. But, you know, I have worked in pieces 13, 15 feet tall, welded steel pieces and bronze pieces, that scale. As I've gotten older and weaker, the scale comes down.
Anyway.
Right.
So you have to be a welder as well, I guess. Or I mean, you've worked with a lot of different materials and mediums. How do you decide which medium to work with, or how those are going to combine to a project, or is it a decision, or what's the process?
Well, I think the process is different with every individual, and certainly teaching at a university, you're aware just by looking at students how many different approaches are possible, because I think if you help each student out in an individual way, I mean, you sort of see each person has a different set of talents, and you see everybody comes at the solution to a problem in a different way. I tend to be, I think, because we were talking earlier, I'm more of a structuralist. I tend to think of things in a sort of an orderly approach, and I generally think through a project or a body of work, a concept, and then work around that concept with a number of different mediums, choosing a theme, and then doing paintings and prints and drawings and sculpture on the basis of what I've chosen as a theme. That, I think, is different than people who work primarily in one medium, and the productivity of that medium is determined in some ways by the discoveries they make in that medium.
Right.
And they do the work, and then they find out what the work was about.
Right.
Really.
Oh, okay.
You know. Whereas I think I start maybe from the other end. I have a clear idea of a body of work I'd like to produce, and not necessarily the medium, but what I intend to express in that process. And then I work through a variety of mediums to accomplish that end.
I guess in accounting, when I think about accounting research, we talk about different research methods that people use, and there seem to be two different kinds of people, general categories. There's the people who are method driven, meaning, like they learn an econometric technique, and every problem they encounter can be solved with that econometric technique. What is it that they have a hammer and everything's a nail? And then there are people who are really driven by questions, and then the research method sort of follows.
Right.
It seems to me like if you have someone who works in the same medium all the time, that that can correlate to having the same sort of research method all the time. What I found is when you have these research questions that require different methods or different mediums, there's a lot of sort of additional training or startup time. How does one learn to operate in all these different mediums?
There's a lot of startup time and a lot of frustration, I think, as when you shift from one to the other till you reach a level of proficiency that's, competent. But at least competent, yeah. Even if you haven't mastered it, it's at least competent. But yeah, I think that's true, and I find the difference, I think, is that when you're working full time in the artistic, in your studio, when you're working full time, you have more time to experiment on things and more time to try things. I think one of the things that is different, I'm glad I came to the academic life sort of later on in my career, but one of the things that is really evident is the amount of time that you have to learn those things makes it almost impractical to try to do too many things. It's better to choose one thing and focus on it and then try to express as many things as possible through that one medium. So I find that's more the norm. I'm sort of a little bit different because I was out in the business world, and I might have had an opportunity to build a bronze sculpture, and so consequently the finances of that allowed me to learn to weld bronze, and I was driven by a financial motivation to learn a new medium. But that's not necessarily the case for other artists.
Well, I know you spent, I think you said 26 years running your own sort of artist studio, I guess, and it was when we think of that, people tend to think of a little room at the back of somebody's house. But I understand you had several different buildings and places that you would work because of the scale and the different mediums. So
it was 9 buildings on over 40 acres. So it was quite a place to keep up, actually. That was another aspect of it. Spent a lot of time mowing grass.
That's how I'm thinking. So when you hear the term struggling artist quite sort of a common thing that you'll hear. So I think some of those struggles are probably financial, but there's probably a lot of different struggles. What struggles did you face, or do you see your students facing as they think about this career in art?
Well, I think one of the struggles is the struggle to focus. And if you're a creative person, you think of lots and lots of things that are good ideas, and trying to focus on an idea and really mine it and generate new information about that idea in some way that adds more knowledge than has currently been available about the subject, and more knowledge that has currently been available about the theme, whatever is. That's really one of the struggles, I think. And of course, then the second part of the struggle is to find somebody who'd like to have that, either in their collection at a museum or in their personal collection, because it parallels their interest. And I think early on in an artist's career, before they've made a lot of work, it's hard to find the support network that you need. That's a struggle, to find people that like your work well enough to try to sell it. Museum curators, directors that like your work well enough to try to exhibit it. And that has to do with competency, skill, and then with a focused approach. I think that's one of the things about teaching that's hard, but it's the most rewarding, I think, is to try to find, as you talk to students, you really just can't lecture, because every student is different. And I mean, you can lecture on great art, but you can lecture on ideals of sculpture, but finally you have to get down on a one-on-one basis and help each student with their unique skill and talent, and help them focus on that talent and what they have to express because of their upbringing or life experience, and then to help them stay focused on that and produce a body of work that's meaningful. And that's rewarding, and it's a difficult task.
Yeah. Where does the you say they use their people, I guess, use their life experiences to help drive this. So where does the inspiration come when they haul in the metal, or you get that new piece of that piece of just sort of rock or whatever it is, where do you find inspiration, and where do others, like students, where do you see them, where does that drive, what drives them?
Well, I think personal experience drives all of it, really, and that experience is unique. One time I was having a conversation that we had an Eskimo carver come when I was a student, who was a stone carver, and he couldn't understand why, when I looked at this block of rock he brought, I didn't see the seal in it, and I'd never seen a seal in my life. I mean, how could I see a seal in it? But he saw the seal in it, and his personal experience that he brought to that, and then it was just simply a matter of carving away everything that didn't look like the seal, right? That I think your personal experience, I think, comes into play when you choose a theme or subject with which you are deeply familiar, and I think to try to choose something other than that is a real mistake. And that's the other thing I think you have to dissuade students from. They open a magazine and they see somebody who has an experience, has life experience, producing a certain type of work, and they think because that's popular now they can do that with the same sort of astute finish that this person has brought about, but they have no knowledge of what has produced that work. So trying to help students determine, and everybody has unique experience, trying to help each student find what is unique about their personal experience and their personal life, or the decisions they've made in their life that give them some unique insight that nobody else has, and how to bring that out in a medium.
I think you used the word meaningful, that you would help the work be meaningful. Who's it meaningful to, or I mean, where does the satisfaction come? I mean, like you've had works, shown, all over the world, and but I mean, is there a place when, for you think, that I really am feeling sasatisfied about that work?
It's never come to me from the outside. That's an interesting thing, because I think a lot of artists think, I have students who want to be famous, right? Which sort of is a secondary thing, right? But I think the first thing is to satisfy yourself that what you had to express, you've expressed that whatever that is to the fullest of your capabilities. And if you do that, then I think you're pretty much comfortable beyond that point, whatever else happens. And you can't control another person, so you can't make a person like your work if they don't like it. I think what you do trust is that if you're really uniquely honest, that people's experience is very, very much the same. There are things we all. There used to be that TV show. Symbols would come up, man, woman, birth, death, and infinity. This big fuzzy-haired guy always would say these words. But I mean, if you hit on those five things, you pretty much covered it.
There's some universals.
There's some universal themes and modes of expression that you can tap into. And if you look at your life and see which of those things you have the most experience with, then you can probably pretty solid ground. But yeah, it was interesting as I began to show in better and better places that I didn't feel better about that. I remember I had a one-man show, I think when I was 19 years old, at a small museum in Laurel, Mississippi. And it was the most excited I've ever been about it. Nothing got any better than that. I kept thinking it was. Kept thinking that each show it would get better, that I would be happier, that these people, these curators would be, that they recognize some quality in the work and were willing to show it in their museum. And finally I realized, no, that really wasn't what it was about. That I would never find a group of outside people whose acceptance of my work gave me what I was looking for. It really was more about this internal struggle. Something that I was interested in doing. And then I think as you get older, you get interested in trying to work collaboratively. And trying to help other artists achieve their aims, and that includes students and mature artists as well. You know, so part of my decision to come to UCF really was to work in a collaborative way. That I had some unique skills that were sort of as a result of the book arts, printing and that kind of thing. I had some unique skills that gave people access to make books and the opportunity to make some things that they just sort of were not easily accessible for mature artists to find those places. So to set up a place where artists could come and do these things was interesting to me.
I know that for the past few years you've not only been an artist and art professor, you've also been a manager, which, you know, accounting professors can't help but have to talk about. So I know you've been serving as the department chair. So how does the business of the university and then the aesthetic side of art come together in your office there in the Visual Arts Building?
Well, I think it comes together in a lot of different ways. My experience running a business, I think, has made it easier to be a chair, in the sense that you have budgets, and you out of that budget you try to make decisions that will allow the students to have what they need to get their education, and faculty to have what they need to pursue their research, and you have to make tough decisions about that, which are very much like running a small business. And in that sense, I think that's been a good experience that I've had, the business experience. I think it's been interesting also in trying to build a relationship for the university art department with the outside community, and to find donors, and to find people who support the projects that we have underway, support our research area, which is Flying Horse Editions, which is the print and book arts part of the research area that we have. And I've been successful at that. You know, I think it's a little bit tougher for the arts than it is for a lot of areas that are more applied. Because we are in competition with other nonprofits. If we ask for money to promote our nonprofit, Flying Horse Editions, and we're in competition with a lot of local nonprofits. And you know, what I've tried to do is point out that we actually aren't in competition, that's a misconception, that we are here to really cooperate with them and offer them things that would be of mutual benefit. And I've been successful in that to a small extent. I hope I'll have more time to devote to that now that I'm phasing out my chair service. But it's been good because I have, I think, met a lot of the members of the artistic community, and I think have been able to point out ways that UCF could partner with them, and we could both benefit, and that we actually aren't in competition.
I know.
Mutual interest.
One of our strategic goals at UCF is to be a partnership university, and so I guess that's drives some of those efforts that you have to do or need to do out in the community. What is there any sort of outreach component to the art department?
Well, our gallery is an outreach program, and it's funded by the Jenkins Endowment, which does a lot for, we have a program called Partners in Arts and Visual Education, which is PAVE, which is a K through 12 outreach program that we have to bring visiting artists to K through 12 programs that don't have art in their basic curriculum. And then we are working with a number of different interesting organizations, the Appleton Museum in Ocala, the Morris Museum, the Orlando Museum, the Pulaski Museum, in trying to find mutual exhibitions and ways that we can share our resources and bring in interesting artists that would serve at all locations. So in that sense, I think it's been a very productive 4 years. We built arrangements and partnerships with all of these locations over the last 4 years, and are doing programming there. So in that sense, I think it's been good for the university and good for the department.
Well, when there's a really short story I've got about when business and when commercialism and art comes together. There's people who traveled to Mexico and they found where an artisan had crafted a chair, and they said, you know, gosh, I would like to have 12 of those chairs to take back for my dining room. And the man said, oh, you could never afford that. You'd have to pay me way too much money to do 12 of these chairs. And, you know, the business guy thinks, well, there's efficiencies there. You know, you just make 11 more just like it. And he said, oh, no, I would be so bored, you know, if I made 11 more chairs that were just the same, that I'll have to charge you a tremendous amount of money for every additional chair. You know, and so, you know, I think that, you know, when you talk about the press and you talk about the business side of the art, you know, the artistic sort of purity of it, and then the commercialized part of it seems to be hard to reconcile. Is it hard to reconcile, or?
Not if you're looking at it from my standpoint. It's not hard to reconcile, but it might be harder to reconcile looking at it from the outside. But I think there are so many overlaps. I mean, if you look at, you know, the university's interest in research as funded research, and you look at, you know, all of the goals we have in terms of trying to relate to the community, trying to build partnerships. So the press activity that we do, where we bring in visiting artists and they work with the students to produce a project. Those projects are distributed sort of as a thank you to people who contribute to our visiting artist program and to Flying Horse Editions. If you look at all that, it is a real working example of applied research. It's an example that goes all the way from creative activities in pure research to